Izuku Midoriya was born with something interesting. Very interesting. A quirk that many really couldn't wrap their heads around, at least not to a giant extent. Only reason why is because they didn't know how he could even use it. How would he even control it? When he went to the doctor, the quirk doctor, there was really no sign of him even having a quirk. But Inko Midoriya, his mother, would say that that can't be the case. There's been signs of this quirk. It's been like as if he's been appearing and disappearing in rooms. He'll walk into a room and then disappear out of it and he'd be outside the house. He has to have something, but nothing. Nothing at all. And obviously the doctor would be confused as well. He wouldn't understand how this young child could be doing these things, but it have no sign of it within his body. Nonetheless, Izuku would head home with his mother Inko, and Inko would wonder if he would be able to show his quirk to the doctor, but of course he wasn't able to do that when they were there. Soon as they got home though, Izuku was back to his normal games, being able to teleport more or less around the house with relative ease. Inko would stop him and ask if he really thinks that he might have some special quirk. Izuku would look at her and slightly shrug and say that, well, maybe he's just really fast. But then he would start laughing. Izuku Midoriya is actually a little bit of a jokester at this young of an age. He knows he has a quirk, and frankly, he didn't really want to show the doctor. His idea is that he'll be able to show off to the entire world once he becomes a hero. So, he doesn't want to give any hints too early on, or at least until he can get to a hero high school. This is the optimistic young version of Izuku that he currently is at this moment. He feels that hiding his quirk from other people and then revealing it to everybody would be, the coolest thing. Everybody would be so shocked. The fact that he can perfectly teleport everywhere he wants, that'd be so awesome. Nonetheless, Inko doesn't really think too much about this. Of course, she wouldn't really mind. And to be fair, why would she mind? Well, nonetheless, his life would go on pretty normally. He would begin to actually experiment with his teleportation quirk over and over again throughout the years, but eventually, all of this idea that he doesn't have a quirk would kind of catch up to him. Bakugou and his cronies would begin bullying Izuku. In the beginning, Izuku didn't care, not one bit. But at the end of the day, and after tons of bullying, and after years of bullying, at the age of about 12, Izuku really had enough. He was so just taken back by the idea that someone could be bullied this much for being quote-unquote quirkless that he didn't even know what to say. What is wrong with some of these people? That, funny and laughable Izuku that he once was faded away pretty quickly. He would eventually go to his mother, and his mother would oblige with the idea of moving schools. Izuku decided that he wanted a new, fresh place, somewhere that he wouldn't get bullied, and that's exactly what he would get. Moving to this brand new school, it wasn't that much different, but there was really no bullying. The people there were pretty similar to those of his other school, but he actually met some really cool people when he was at that young age, about 12 or 13. He met a boy by the name of Kirishima. Kirishima actually sported this regular black hair and had this pretty interesting quirk that Izuku began to learn about. He continues to meet more and more new people in this school, and they're all under the assumption that Izuku is actually quirkless. Feeling no need to really correct them, he doesn't say much more. As long as they're not really messing with him, he doesn't really care. He's kind of lost his funny side that he once had when he was younger about the whole idea that he wanted to surprise everybody. Now he just feels like, nobody really deserves to even know. Izuku would begin to actually start training his quirk more and more, getting to the point that he was able to teleport himself to various locations around Japan, and this would be extremely easy as well. Izuku would be able to get his mother to work in a matter of a split second, would be able to get himself to school in a matter of a split second, and he continued to just use his quirk, make sure nobody would see, of course, but he wanted to use it to master it entirely. But he began to think, what is his quirk exactly? Is it actually just a blip, him teleporting or basically jumping into a different dimensional field? Or what is it exactly? It seems like for him, it's as if this small portal opens, but then closes before anybody can even imagine it's there. He begins to basically theorize that maybe he'll be able to teleport body parts, or be able to basically throw punches through various portals. He's not exactly sure how that would even work, and he decides, after basically years of training, he decides that he's gonna try it out. At about the age of 14 to 15, with the end of the middle school year approaching and him needing to learn how to actually attack things and be a proper hero, he begins to try and hit this tree that's currently outside his house. He begins to punch over and over again from a distance, trying to hit it, trying to do anything. But he would end up either teleporting to the tree or around the tree, and it just wouldn't flat out work at all. Izuku would try over and over and over again, but it just didn't work. He couldn't get himself to focus hard enough, focus enough to actually do what he's thinking. Maybe it's too complicated for him now, so he decides to hold off on it. After some time, the last day of middle school, and some introductions to the idea of them joining a hero school is introduced. Many of his friends, Kirishima, and many people he's met by the name of Ashido Mina and some of her friends want to go to UA, but frankly, the only people talented enough are Kirishima and obviously Mina, at least to the extent of what their quirks are. But at the same time, Izuku knows that he could get in. There's obviously a good chance, but to everybody else, maybe they don't think so, but just don't want to tell them because they don't want to hurt his feelings. Not many people know about his quirk to a very good extent, but after some time and after some realization, he now knows that if he's going to train with somebody, or gonna train, he needs to train with another person. That person being most likely Kirishima. He begins to speak with Kirishima about training for the UA exam, the entrance exam, and Kirishima is totally for this, but wonders how their training would exactly go, because he's not sure if his quirk will match up very well with Izuku not having one. But Izuku smiles and says that he does have one. Just as Kirishima hears this, Izuku grabs him on the shoulder, and immediately they appear in a home. Izuku calls for his mother, and his mother appears with him, or walks out of her room and appears out of a room, and Kirishima questions where they are. Izuku says that they're at his house. How did we get here? How did you do that? Aren't you quirkless? Izuku smiles and laughs and says that's what he told everybody. He wanted to basically not let anybody know this, but since he feels that he can trust Kirishima, he doesn't mind telling him. Kirishima is shocked, but he finds this so cool. Izuku can teleport? He asks what else he can do, but Izuku says that's about it. There's some other things that he can theoretically try to do, but he hasn't figured them out just yet. That's where Kirishima comes in. Maybe having a training partner and maybe having someone to basically work with will allow him to figure some brand new things out. And of course, Kirishima is totally up for this, and Inko just tells them to be safe, be careful, and of course they're gonna have to study as well. Izuku doesn't find anything wrong with this at all. Studying isn't hard for him. Kirishima, on the other hand, well, it's a little difficult. Nonetheless though, Izuku and Kirishima would begin their training, but only after a day of training, they begin to hear stuff on the news while they're just sparring normally. They begin to hear that this sludge villain is currently attacking the area, and Izuku says that they should head home really fast to check out what this is about. He teleports them back to his home, and they begin to watch what's going on. The sludge villain is running rampant around the city, and it seems to eventually have captured a young boy. Izuku would look closely at the screen to see somebody he knows. See Katsuki Bakugou. He's shocked to basically see Bakugou stuck within the sludge villain, and he looks at Kirishima, in which Kirishima wonders why he looks so basically out of it. Izuku says that was his quote-unquote old friend, someone that he knew back at his old school. Of course, they're not actually friends, and Izuku makes this appearance, but Izuku wonders if he can actually get him out of there, if it's possible. Just as he's watching, nobody's going, no one's helping them at all. He then asks Kirishima if he wants to go check it out as well. Kirishima's saying yes, so they teleport over. Izuku walks up toward the caution tape, and he watches as no heroes at all are helping. Izuku, in his mind, questions his ability. Will he be able to teleport within the sludge villain and take Bakugou out? Does he have to get closer and touch Bakugou? Well, most likely, just in case he wants to touch Bakugou on the shoulder, on the chest, anything, so that he can basically just teleport them both out and not worry about teleporting the sludge villain as well. Izuku looks around, and he doesn't know how he's supposed to get in, but he says screw it. He kicks his way through the caution tape and begins sprinting out. Everybody is currently watching in shock, including someone that nobody knew was even there by the name of All Might. All Might is watching as Izuku runs forward. Multiple heroes try to tackle him, but it's as if he disappears and then reappears in a frontward place. Izuku doesn't want to make it apparent that he has some teleportation quirk, especially not to the villain that he's about to face. He goes sprinting at the villain, and using anything he currently has on him, he begins throwing it at the villain's eyes and any weak points he can possibly see. Izuku eventually would land a clean pencil shot to the villain's eye as he screams, looking up in the sky to basically get this pencil out of his eye. A bunch of his weird goo would be shot at Izuku, and Izuku would teleport past it just as the sludge villain's not looking, teleporting right in front of Bakugou. In a matter of seconds, Izuku reaches out, grabbing Bakugou on the shoulder, Bakugou in complete shock at who this is. Because in a matter of seconds, Izuku has Bakugou back in his house, in Bakugou's house, with his mother in complete shock at who's standing right there. Of course, Izuku just smiles and waves as he teleports off again, and he of course teleports right next to Kirishima, teleporting Kirishima and himself back toward his own home. Of course, Bakugou and his mother and his family would be happy to see him okay, but shocked at the fact that Izuku just jumped in, saved him, jumped back out in a matter of seconds. Nobody really even saw his face. But luckily, All Might, the one cloaked there and currently hiding, did. He's happy that he was able to handle this whole kidnapping situation, but this gave All Might the courage and the strength to make sure to put this villain down for good. He extends his limits and he does just that. His simple mistake allowed for this to occur, so he was going to end it now. He basically defeated the sludge villain, ending that little charade, and eventually All Might would wonder who exactly was this green-haired boy. But luckily enough for him, he would learn relatively quickly. Well, because All Might is going to be at the UA entrance exam. Of course, he would have to wait about 10 months, and those 10 months Izuku and Kirishima and anybody else who would want to train would begin training for the UA entrance exam, and Izuku would begin to master his quirk more and more. Of course, master is used loosely because it's hard to do certain things he wants to do. Of course, him teleporting back and forth is a really good tactic for certain things, but that's tiring. Things get tiring. So upping his stamina and upping his strength and upping all of the physical attributes of himself is something Kirishima and Izuku want to do. And of course, Izuku uses his teleportation quirk to teleport Kirishima into tall trees and throw him off to basically embrace the idea that he can take more damage and more things and eventually would get stronger and stronger like that. Of course, they make sure they don't do anything too crazy. They don't want to throw Kirishima off of a very tall building and have him go splat because he's not ready. But nonetheless, it definitely is beneficial for the both of them. After the entirety of the 10 months is finally over, they've done some studying, they've done some training, and now they're ready for the UA entrance exam. Izuku and Kirishima would be there walking up, ready for the entrance exam, and just like in canon, Izuku would be put right next to Bakugou, but he wouldn't know that until he eventually would get in. As they're walking by though, Izuku begins to just walk normally, but he actually trips on a rock. When he trips on a rock, he goes plummeting face first. Kirishima about to grab him, but someone else does it before he actually could. A girl that was right beside them tapped him on the shoulder and he's now floating. Izuku then teleports himself, rearranging himself back to his feet, in which the girl is completely shocked to see this and lets him go, releasing her quirk. Izuku scratches the back of his head and smiles slightly smiles and thanks her, and doesn't really say much more. He just drops the smile once again, gets serious, and walks forward. Of course, Kirishima's infectious and smiley and happy personality has definitely worn off on Izuku, but it's not like he's like that happy Izuku. He's pretty happy, but let's be honest, it would be more of him being condescending most of the time that he would be smiling, especially when he dropped off Bakugou about 10 months ago when he saved him. It was more of that condescending smile, smiling toward his parents, basically saying like, yeah, I saved your son and I have a quirk, unlike what all these other kids thought. But you guys know what I mean. I feel like everybody wants to flex sometimes, and that's what Izuku definitely does, or did back then. But at the same time, he's starting to Kirishima's definitely starting to rub off on Izuku a little bit more from when he was very serious and just cold-hearted after the whole bullying incident. Nonetheless, they'd enter the building, and obviously Izuku would find out who he's sitting next to. Katsuki Bakugou. Of course, he doesn't really want to sit next to him, but they don't really say much at all, except for the fact that Bakugou is basically still thinking about the time that he saved him, saying that he didn't need help, and that he doesn't really need to thank him for anything, and Izuku just doesn't even respond. He doesn't really care. Nonetheless, the President Mike would eventually approach and begin to speak, telling everybody that they're going to be taking the written portion of the exam in another room, and once that is taken, they finally can take the practical exam. At the end of the day, this is what matters. The practical exam is basically do or die. If you don't do good on the practical exam, then it's a bust. There's some people that are pretty dumb in UA, to be honest, and frankly, they're able to squeak it out because of the practical exam. But with Izuku, of course, he's not stupid. He did pretty well on the written exam, but if he just basically throws up a dud in terms of the practical, well, he can kiss the idea of going to UA goodbye. He would then head over to his gate and begin to look around, seeing that same girl that he talked to not too long ago. While he would try to walk over to her, but would be instantly stopped by this boy by the name of Tenya Ida. Tenya Ida would say that he won't let him sabotage her, and Izuku is kind of weirded out by him, just teleporting behind him and continuing to walk. Izuku doesn't even know what to say to this guy. This guy is just so weird. While he is standing there waiting for the gates to open, he speaks to the girl that basically saved him from falling on his face for a little bit. They don't really have that much of a conversation until the gates swing open and Izuku teleports extremely far in front of them, and everybody is kind of calling him a cheater initially, but then President Mike says that boy has the right idea. There are no countdowns in a real battle. Izuku begins to try and punch through robots, but it seems like he's not strong enough. Izuku realizes this and tries to find a way to do anything. He works on trying to beat up the 1-point robot and eventually would break it, but it would take so long. It takes way too long to do that. Izuku decides that he'll try something else. He teleports, grabs one, teleports it to a building, and drops it off from the top. It smashes into the ground, getting destroyed, and Izuku feels like this might be the best way to do it. He continues to do this over and over and over again, but it's beginning to get him kind of tired. And honestly, it's not the most efficient thing he can do. The 3-point robots sometimes take a couple throws extra. The 2 and 1-pointers sometimes break on one impact, but not always. So frankly, he doesn't have that many points racked up yet. Izuku begins to think that it might be too difficult. It might be too much for him to actually destroy these robots. So when he's looking out from over the top of the building, he sees multiple people basically in trouble. If someone's gets really tired and is about to get attacked, he decides just to teleport them out of there to help them as much as he possibly can. He feels that at least if he can't get through this, he'll help other people get through it. Izuku would begin teleporting people around to basically get them either away from robots or next to robots. Izuku didn't realize though that this was helping him. Izuku is doing everything he should be doing as a hero. He should be destroying the robots, helping or saving other people, and assisting other people to destroy robots. Those 3 things alone make him an actual hero. That is how a hero is supposed to approach things, and it's funny because him seemingly thinking that he is weak or he doesn't have enough experience with his quirk forced him into doing something more humble, more basically knowing that it wouldn't get him points, quote unquote, doing something that would sacrifice his own points to help others. This is why he would gain an extensive amount of points, for it. Just as he thinks that everything's coming to an end, and frankly he's going to be going home, kind of sad because he's not going to get close to even passing, he begins to hear the rumbles of the 0-point robot, and it begins to just move in on everybody. He watches as everybody runs, and it seems like everyone's good and completely out of there. But he does see one person, that same brown-haired girl stuck under some rubble. Izuku immediately teleports to her and then teleports her out of there, teleporting her to the medical bay that would allow Recovery Girl to heal her up. Of course, the time would eventually expire, but the 0-pointer would eventually just get shut down because everyone just ran away. There was no need for anybody to go and try to blow it up to act like they're so macho. Izuku would look at the 0-pointer and wonder if he would even have a chance. He might have been able to teleport the thing into a building, but would it actually destroy, or would it destroy the building? Izuku begins to think these things and thinks that in terms of raw strength, he just lacks so much. But nonetheless, he doesn't really think much about it. And of course, the girl with the brown hair begins to question why he would help her when he should have been getting more points. Izuku waves his hand and says that it's completely fine, that he wanted to help her anyways, that he was trying to help everybody because it doesn't seem like he's gonna be strong enough to be a hero. Recovery Girl then stops him slightly and says that what he was doing out there was being a hero. And, she thinks that he'll be surprised when he gets to the letter. Izuku is basically taken back by the thing that she just said, but he decides to head off after saying goodbye to both of them. Izuku would eventually meet up with Kirishima, and Kirishima would say that he thinks he did really good, that their training really did a lot for him. Izuku begins to question if he did well, but says that he got a good word in with Recovery Girl, one of the heroes on site, and she said that he would be surprised, in which Kirishima is shocked to hear this. Bro, Mito bro, that has to mean that you got in. Izuku doesn't really know if that's true and kind of just scratches his head. Yeah, maybe, but maybe not. I don't see how I could have got in without destroying that many robots. I only destroyed like maybe 1 3-pointer and then a couple 2s and 1s. That's about it. Kirishima pats him on the shoulder, saying that if one of the other heroes there says that he did a good job and did what a hero should, then there's no way he doesn't get in. He's at least getting into UA's Class 1B, probably even Class 1A if that's truly what if it's true to what she's saying. This makes Izuku feel a good bit better, so he just heads off with Kirishima to celebrate on hopefully their way into UA. After their celebration, they go their separate ways, and they say that they'll be training here and there together until they get their said letter. Eventually, that letter would come. The letter would be definitely surprising though. Kirishima and Izuku would stand there, and Kirishima says that he'll go first, opening the letter to see All Might. All Might begins to say that Kirishima did a great job and that he got into Class 1A, ranking him in terms of everybody in the middle of the pack, but slightly higher than the middle of the pack because surprisingly enough, not to All Might because they don't really know, because surprisingly enough, Kirishima did pretty well on the test. He thanks Izuku for that, and Izuku says that it's no problem. At the end of the day, he's the one that took the test. He didn't take it for him. He says he knows, but of course the extra studying helps like crazy. Izuku nods as he opens up his, as All Might would appear as well. For the first time in a little bit, Izuku would crack a smile as he watched, well, his favorite hero, the number 1 hero in front of him, beginning to speak.
Izuku Midoriya, now you are an interesting case. We looked at your test scores, and let's say they're impressive. Actually, top of your class impressive. In the top 3 by all means necessary. Now, I want to speak about, well, the practical exam. You made all of us think far differently about that exam, my boy, which is something I never knew would be said. We have a rescue portion of the exam, which you rescued many people, giving you a ton of points. And yeah, you didn't have many of robot points, but maybe we have to rethink a category in terms of robot assists. You did help others destroy robots too, and frankly, those points should definitely partially go to you. So, that's what we'll be doing, giving you partial of many points of, well, others you helped, and also others you've saved. So you have a rescue point total of 150, and also a robot total of about 50. Now, my boy, I hope you realize that you are definitely one to be a hero, and that you are even at the top of your class.
Izuku is in complete shock. His stomach drops. He's like about on the verge of crying. Izuku drops everything, drops his envelope, and Inko runs in, hearing exactly what happened, and Kirishima is jumping with joy, excited for his friend. Izuku, he thought to himself that he really didn't have a chance, that he didn't think he would actually pass this exam from what he's seen, what he's done. Now he's being told he's the number 1, that he got the highest score, beyond people like Kirishima, beyond people like Bakugou. He doesn't even know what to say. He doesn't even know what to believe. Nonetheless, Izuku is ready. He knows that it's time for UA. From a young child, he wondered how it would look to take that next step into becoming a hero. And this is the time for him to do that. He got a compliment from the number 1 hero, All Might. From All Might himself. Well, Izuku is going to push himself, make sure that he's strong, and he's going to show everybody at UA that this is no fluke. It wasn't just because of a special portion that they added because of him. It wasn't just because of that. It's because he is a true hero. And using his quirk, he'll make sure he's just that. During this time though, during that little space in between UA and obviously them having that rest time, Izuku decides to teleport him, his mother, and all his friends to actually a place nice. They decide they're gonna head over to some place like Italy and have a nice little vacation, and of course, they don't have to go through airports or anything. Izuku just teleports them over there by looking at a picture of a resort that they booked. That he will stay there for a couple days because he knows just as much as everybody else that working hard, you also need to have good rest and relaxation. And that's exactly what they're going to be getting. And once they come back from their little vacation, he'll be heading straight to UA. The first step in his hero journey begins right after this. And in the next part of What If Deku Had a Teleportation Quirk. Izuku Midoriya is now ready for the first day of UA. He finally actually got told by All Might through a letter that he is the #1 student. Of course, this makes Izuku ecstatic, and he's ready for that first day. He would arrive at that first day with Kirishima, looking around in complete awe with him. This is the first time in a long time where he's on the same level of excitement as Kirishima, being very jumpy and excited and just an ecstatic person like a little kid should be when you finally have made your dream come true. Izuku would approach the door of UA to see that, or of Class 1A, to see that the door is massive. Both him and Kirishima would walk in and begin to look around. Immediately, Izuku would notice, though, one person. Katsuki Bakugou is getting yelled at by a boy that has some blue hair. Izuku recognizes both of them, mostly Bakugou because, he went to school with Bakugou and he was a bully for Izuku. But nonetheless, he begins to approach his desk and he sits down with Kirishima. Kirishima isn't too fond of the idea that Bakugou bullied Izuku. Maybe Bakugou isn't that same person, and Izuku makes that apparent, saying that he doesn't have to hold any grudges for him, that he doesn't really care either way, that it's good to make friends with new people, and maybe he'll be treated differently around Bakugou. Just as Izuku is saying this, Bakugou comes up to Izuku's desk and basically tells him that he must be cheating, that he somehow cheated to get in here, and Izuku doesn't say really anything and just looks at Bakugou weirdly. Kirishima jumps in the defense of Izuku and tells Bakugou that he doesn't understand how much he's actually trained, that Izuku has trained so much to get to where he is right now, so he has no right to say that he cheated in any sort of way. Izuku just kind of brushes this off, and Kirishima, let's just say, didn't have the best of first appearances in terms of Bakugou. Some time would then eventually pass, and everybody would begin to flow in. Eventually, that same brown-haired girl by the name of Ochako Uraka would come into the classroom as well, beginning to talk to Izuku, but Aizawa would not, let this happen. That's because he tells them all that if they want to have, conversations as friends, they can do that on their own time, that they're going to be doing hero work from here on out. He begins to tell them all to meet him outside, get on their gym clothes, and that they're going to be doing their first little quirk assessment. Everybody listens, but some question about orientation. But Aizawa reminds them that this is a hero school. He can do whatever he wants, when he wants. If he decides that they are not going to orientation, then he decides exactly that. Everybody would eventually listen and arrive at this ballpark-esque area. Basically an area that they can take this baseball and throw it as far as possible. Izuku and everybody would arrive, and Aizawa would explain exactly what the first thing they'll be doing, explaining that they'll be taking this ball and throwing it as far as possible. Very similar to their middle school activities or their middle school little training activities that they would do, or tests that they would do, and that's exactly what they'll be going through, but they'll be allowed to use their quirks. This then leads to Izuku being called up, first. That's because he's the #1 student out of the entrance exam. Immediately, Bakugou is furious, wondering in the first place who was #1, but now knowing that it was Izuku, this makes his blood boil, beginning to think that Izuku obviously must have lied to him about being quirkless at one point, and of course he did. Izuku wasn't quirkless, he just didn't want to tell anybody that he wasn't. But at the same time, Izuku did basically passed the entrance exam on some different regard. He didn't exactly pass the entrance exam how everybody else would have. Nonetheless, he doesn't really mind Bakugou. Bakugou will continue his blabbering over and over and over again, and frankly, he's not going to really worry about that too much. He'll take the ball and then stand there and ask Aizawa if basically he can throw the ball by any means, as long as it basically gets thrown out of his hand at one point. And Aizawa says that's fine. Izuku would then wind up and throw it, but just as he releases the ball, it would poof into thin air. After the ball would disappear, Aizawa would look at the meters. 9,566,000. Interesting. Where'd you throw the thing? I just teleported it to Italy. That's the last place I remember I've been, and it's pretty far away. Aizawa doesn't even know what to say, but just tells him to, go back in line. Just as he's about to go back in line, though, a stray explosion comes swaying at his face, but Izuku immediately dodges out of the way and just kicks Bakugou in the back, forcing him to stumble over. Izuku continues to walk and just stands waiting. Aizawa is pretty impressed at what Izuku just displayed, that he's able to utilize his teleportation to a pretty advanced degree. On top of that, Aizawa didn't even have to react himself to help him out. Izuku could handle it himself, which is a great thing to see, especially when we're talking about actual practical scenarios. Because let's be honest, the robot scenario was not that practical, but nonetheless, it's something that they had to deal with initially, and Izuku was able to push through it. Aizawa would then announce for everybody else to continue on, and some people would begin to think that this would be, fun and amazing to, like some game. But Aizawa would make it apparently clear and abundantly clear that this is no game, and that whoever gets last place will be expelled. And that's all because they thought that it was going to be so much fun. Izuku not really minding this, and most people not really minding this because, well, they're pretty competent in their quirk. But nonetheless, they'll continue on with all of this. Izuku would be pretty good and pretty well off in almost every single category, except for maybe the physical categories or like the grip strength and stuff like that. But in terms of speed categories, it would be flawless, easy. Izuku would just teleport to the finish line, or the side jumps would be easy as well. Izuku is, for one, extremely fast, and he could teleport, so it would be extremely easy for him to do that as well. Anything in terms of that would be a breeze, and would continue to be a breeze with relative ease. Izuku would finish up, and would actually finish first among everybody, and the person in very last place is Hagakure, the girl that is just, well, invisible. Don't really understand why she wasn't last place normally in the show. I feel like I've had conversations with people about this, and never mind. It doesn't really matter, but that's just the thing. But nonetheless, she's announced to be last place, and of course Bakugou is not very happy about Izuku being first place, even though it has nothing to do with him in the overall scheme of things. But of course, he would have some tall tale to say about it, because that's just who Bakugou is. But during this time, there's actually somebody currently watching the students, wondering if they're doing well, and if they're actually well worthy of the power that he holds. That's All Might. All Might decided to hold off on giving anybody his quirk because, well, that was the whole point of him coming to UA in the first place, and after seeing Izuku, he's definitely interested in Izuku's power. Maybe Izuku will be a perfect fit for One for All. Nonetheless, he's not so sure, but maybe he'll come back to that conclusion sooner rather than later. The day would then finish up, and everything would just, end. Of course, Hagakure would quote-unquote get expelled, but she wouldn't actually get expelled. Aizawa would bring her in practically in the next 2 days, And finally, the next hero training that they would be going through would finally arrive, and that's the heroes versus villains training. Immediately, All Might would arrive, busting through the door, exclaiming that he's walking through the door like a normal person, even though we all know he actually isn't. He tells them all to get on their hero outfits, and Izuku would wear something very similar to his one in canon, just not the one that his mom would make him, more of the one with the face guard and stuff like that. He would have no real reason to change that design. I mean, there's no real benefits he can think of in terms of changing it for his teleportation. He can teleport with his clothing, so anything that would give him, well, mobility and slash half decent armor would be okay for him. Nonetheless, they would all get on their hero outfits and begin to listen to what All Might has to say.
Okay, everybody. This is exactly what's going to happen. Heroes versus villains. The villain's goal is to protect the bomb that is currently in the building. And the hero's goal is to capture that said bomb or capture the other villains. Now that we all have that understood, we're going to lay out the teams. Izuku is then put with Ochako Uraka, the brown-haired girl that he saved during the entrance exam, and also the other team, which is the villains, is Bakugou and Tenya Ida. Izuku realizes that him being on the hero side is actually a huge benefit for them. He actually immediately believes that they'll win relatively quickly, and most of you probably already know how they'll win, and there's really no reason for me to drag that out. They would eventually arrive at the building and they would be given 5 minutes to speak, and Izuku would just flat out say is once they find out where the location of the bomb is, it doesn't matter, it's over. He'll just teleport the bomb outside or teleport inside, grab the bomb and put it outside. Relatively simple plan. So Ochako would then, after the 5 minutes, float them around to basically see where the bomb is. They would then go back on top of the building once it's spotted, Izuku teleporting to the bomb and then teleporting the bomb and himself up onto the roof and then teleporting all of them back to the ground. In a matter of seconds, it's over. Izuku has already captured the bomb and has done probably more than what he probably should have. He could have just teleported to the bomb, put his hand on it, and it's over. But he decided, maybe he should go up and beyond with this one and make sure that the bomb is completely outside, how a hero would do in this situation. All Might is happy with it, announcing them as the winners, but Bakugou is not too happy. Of course, Tenya Ida would compliment them, saying that that was definitely the most efficient and frankly unstoppable way of going about things, and he's surprised he didn't even think about it. But frankly, how would he even have stopped it anyways? It's not like he really had a choice. Izuku appreciates the compliment, but Bakugou is not too happy, saying that he wanted to have an actual fight. All Might interjects and says that their fight will definitely come. Of course, sparring is a crucial part of all of this, but don't take Mr. Izuku Midoriya too lightly. Just because his quirk is built for rescue and basically doing things like this doesn't mean he can't fight. A teleporter or someone that can just zip back and forth and the control he has will not be an easy fight by any means. All Might says this, and actually Momo Yaoyorozu interjects, saying various different reasons why Izuku would have the upper hand in that fight, and it also seems that Izuku has trained a lot more than Bakugou has. Bakugou would get pretty mad at hearing all of this, but would eventually just storm off. After everybody else would go about their heroes versus villains training, the work and basically the training would be then wrapped up. All Might would tell everybody that they did a great job, and everybody would head off, home. After some more time, their next major training session would finally be upon them, and that's the USJ. The USJ is a rescue facility, and they'll be taught by a Pro Hero 13. The entirety of the class would be spoken to by Aizawa, and Aizawa would explain everything, eventually leading to telling everybody to head onto the bus. As everybody is on the bus and they're all driving to the USJ, they're speaking about who they believe has the strongest quirk. They're kind of in between Bakugou, Izuku, and Shoto Todoroki, and the only reason why they're between the three of them is that in terms of pure power, Bakugou and Todoroki have pretty insane quirks.
But in terms of just usability, like flat out usability, Izuku arguably has a better quirk. But there's some flaws that they might see, that if he could he really portal or basically teleport with various other people. They've seen him do it with one or maybe two people, but can he do it with a ton of people? Izuku shrugs and says that he hasn't really tried it, but he can assume he can, and that his teleportation's a little weird. Every time he uses it, he can feel a portal kind of basically illuminate around him. It's in split seconds and microseconds so that nobody can even see it, but it is definitely there. So it is theoretically possible for him to teleport a large group of people at the same time, but he's not so sure, because the easiest way of going about it is just putting his hand on someone's shoulder and just teleporting them like that, because, well, it doesn't take as much strength and power for him to do such a thing. This is pretty usable information from Izuku, but nonetheless, they would eventually come to the conclusion that in terms of raw power, well, most likely Todoroki would be the strongest, quote unquote, at least what they believe. They haven't really seen Bakugou fight at all because of the stunt that Izuku pulled. And in terms of usability, Izuku probably has arguably the best quirk. With that said, though, they finally arrive at the USJ and they're introduced to Pro Hero 13. Pro Hero 13 allows them all to walk in, and she begins to speak to everybody about what's going on and what's happening. She begins to basically talk about what the USJ is, how the rescue facilities work, and anything and so forth. But just as she continues this, Kirishima taps on Izuku's shoulder and points something out.
Hey bro, I didn't know there was fake villains.
Fake? What are you talking about, fake villains? Izuku looks further to see a ton of villains piling out of a portal. Izuku is shocked and immediately points it out as well, and Aizawa tells all of them basically to be safe.
So, kid, about that whole teleporting masses thing, can you do that?
I mean, depends. Like I said, I'm not so sure. Might overexert me to the point where I can't get everybody else out. So if you want to get people out, I would recommend we get all the students out first. Aizawa completely in agreement. He believes that this is the best course of action. Izuku tells all the students to crowd in near him so that he can get them all out into safety. Immediately, the villains are confused at what's going on, but in a matter of a split second, all of them poof into nothingness as if they were never there, and Izuku arrives back, well, at UA. He then takes one deep breath in and realizes that he's good. Okay, yeah, I'm not too tired. I'll see you guys in a second. He teleports back toward the USJ and asks if they want a teleport in, or should he go get other heroes and teleport them in to the USJ. Aizawa looks at him and is pretty impressed at what the kid just did. In fact, that he's literally was talking about how he had no clue if he can actually teleport masses, and if he could, it would be extremely exhausting, and he's still on his feet. Nonetheless, Aizawa says to bring more heroes here, like now. Izuku would begin teleporting to different places around UA, telling Nezu exactly what's going on. And he immediately goes on to the intercom, telling everybody the situation, and basically telling everybody that Izuku is going to be teleporting them back and forth immediately. Izuku begins to do this, teleporting more and more and more heroes over there. And eventually, the one and only All Might would be last up. Izuku teleporting to where All Might is, but seeing him in his non-buffed up form. All Might then immediately grows in size and says that he apologizes to basically put a damper on the idea that he's invincible. He's basically going to have to explain this later to Izuku, because he has definitely something to ask him in the future. Izuku just shrugs this off, not thinking too much of it. Of course, he can't really think that much of it at this moment, as he teleports All Might to the USJ to help the rest of the heroes. But he teleports back with all of his classmates, and he immediately falls to the ground in complete exhaustion, panting like crazy. Izuku, completely exhausted, is helped to his feet by his classmates and then put on an actual chair instead of laying on the ground. and luckily everybody should be safe and sound. The USJ situation completely neutralized because, well, of Izuku. Izuku being able to get everybody out to safety, and then also put all these pro heroes in a situation to make sure none of these villains actually escape, quote unquote. Of course, this would lead to multiple still escaping, only the main villains, of course, because they already had an escape plan. But luckily, they were able to handle the Nomu way easier than they would in canon, especially with All Might being the only one going one-on-one. Instead, you have All Might and a ton of pro heroes actually helping him, and even the villains realize that, well, this isn't the most beneficial thing they've ever seen. This is actually pretty detrimental to the plan that they had at hand. Luckily, after a while would pass, everybody would then arrive back at UA, and it would be confirmed that everything is okay, and the villains were forced to retreat, and a lot of them were captured. So luckily everything went well, no students were hurt, no harm, no foul, right? Well, not exactly. Just as Aizawa is explaining the entire situation and basically what occurred and how everything went pretty smoothly, he's about to thank Izuku, but Izuku begins to listen and out of nowhere just teleports away. He actually just teleports back into the field, and Aizawa calls out to him asking what the hell is going on. Immediately teleporting back towards class, but kind of ramming into a couple people. Sorry about that, Aizawa, you might need to cancel my quirk. Izuku, in a kind of state of panic, begins to teleport everywhere, not being able to actually stop it. It seems like an overexertion of his quirk, and not having time to actually, well, rest is kind of putting him in an interesting situation. Izuku would then be brought to Recovery Girl, and it'd be quickly explained that he just straight up needs to not use his quirk at all, and the fact is that he'll need to rest a good while. This does disappoint Izuku and would disappoint him even more, especially when the idea of the UA Sports Festival is brought up. Izuku not being able to even attend is very, very frustrating to him, especially after Aizawa believes this to be the best course of action. There's really no reason for him to push his limits any more than he already has, and Aizawa begins to explain that he'll get this little thing that happened, or at least what Izuku did for all the pro heroes at the USJ. He'll make sure to spread that around to the other agencies and how well he did, and basically saying that he'll put in a good word for him, so he won't have to worry about any agencies questioning if they should pick him up or not, or give him an offer or not. This does make Izuku feel a little bit better, but of course Bakugou and some others that wanted to compete with Izuku would be pretty frustrated at this. Izuku would then watch the UA Sports Festival. Of course he wants to watch his buddy Kirishima and some other people, even including Bakugou, even though Bakugou is kind of a, well, how do I say this, an asshole to him? Yeah, that sounds about right. He does watch it, and hearing that the first event is literally an obstacle course race actually kind of makes him laugh, because of the fact that he could literally teleport through it and probably break every single record in that regard, and it would be super easy. And he continues just to watch more and more, and seeing that a lot of it would favor him in a great degree. Nonetheless, he'll watch on and watches on until he sees, well, Katsuki Bakugou win, getting number 1, but he's not too happy. Of course, he wanted to fight Izuku, and the 1-versus-1 battles would have been perfect. And in a way, Izuku got his minor victory, especially with the fact that Bakugou was so frustrated at the fact that he couldn't fight Izuku. Izuku found this pretty funny, and didn't really take this too personal by any means. After some more time of resting, Izuku would finally go back into the classroom. With this arrival, Aizawa would begin to speak to everybody, talking about their performances and so on and so forth, and eventually showing everybody basically their offers. Izuku actually getting in the top 5 for offers. Of course, it's not too crazy in terms of how many he's got, but he still got a substantial amount. Nonetheless, they begin speaking about where they should go, and everybody is given a list of basically who they can choose from. Izuku begins to flip through and actually begins to look through to see where he wants to go. Izuku then finds a pretty interesting one, deciding that maybe he'll go to this person right here. He then chooses that said person, but Aizawa does say that All Might himself wants to actually give him a bit of a recommendation. Izuku is confused to hear this, but when class is over and he goes outside, All Might is waiting and he's actually shaking like crazy, admittedly saying that his former master or former sensei wants to train Izuku or give him a bit of an internship. Izuku is confused to hear this, and All Might would bring Izuku over and say one thing, that he wants to give Izuku his powers. He wants to give him one for all. Izuku would be shocked and taken back by this idea, but he's not so sure if this is the best idea for him. Should he take on this power? Should he really take on the responsibility of being the successor of All Might? Will this actually help him so much to the point that it makes him not the hero he wanted to be? He'll be someone else entirely? Would it be dumb of him to not accept this offer? Well, you'll have to find out on the next part. Izuku Midoriya is standing in front of the one and only All Might, an offer that, frankly, he can't really resist. He is offered what is known as One for All. One for All is a powerful quirk that All Might currently wields, and he's been looking for a successor. He actually held off on actually giving somebody this One for All power because of Izuku himself, seeing the potential that this teleporting quirk using student would actually hold. So he decided to wait to see the progression Izuku would begin to have, and obviously he's seen enough. Yes, he could have chosen more and more people, but he decided upon Izuku, and it would be dumb of Izuku not to accept the power. But it would be dumb of him to think that this would be a cakewalk. Of course, when he accepts One for All, he's forced to eat a hair from All Might's head, which he's pretty skeptical about, but nonetheless, the power is transferred, and the next day he'd be heading over to Gran Torino's place to finally get some real training in. Of course, Izuku has no idea how to use One for All. He knows how to use his own quirk, and that's about it. But he does know that his quirk combined with One for All, the strength of All Might, could be insanely powerful. Teleporting on top of the strength of All Might could be something, well, revolutionary as a hero. So when he arrives at Gran Torino's, he's pretty optimistic to, as quick as possible, learn as much as possible. When he knocks on the door though, he would eventually enter to see Gran Torino on the ground with so-called blood everywhere. It would end up being known that it's actually just ketchup, and Gran Torino would finally introduce himself. They would begin speaking about, obviously, Izuku's original quirk, but also One for All as well, learning more and more about One for All and what it does. Izuku immediately tells him that he hasn't used One for All at all to this point, and Gran Torino believes that this is a perfect time to do so. Gran Torino begins to bounce off the walls like crazy, but Izuku dodges with relative ease using his, teleportation quirk. Gran Torino remarks toward him that he shouldn't be using that quirk, at least not for now. Gran Torino knows how good he is with that quirk, and frankly, hitting Izuku would be pretty difficult, but he wants to make sure he can use One for All, not his teleportation quirk. Izuku, hearing him out, decides to take any advice he possibly can from Gran Torino. Trying to block or dodge just normally initially is extremely difficult, but eventually he would slowly but surely get a hang of One for All, learning that this quirk is very advanced. If he's not careful, he could destroy his entire body, but of course Izuku is extremely fit, so that shouldn't be too big of a worry in terms of him, exploding. In terms of him breaking a limb or breaking an arm and stuff like that, that is definitely a worry. Nonetheless, Izuku would start training more and more, learning this technique to basically flow one for all throughout his entire body. He uses his teleportation quirk very similar. His teleportation quirk involves his entire body. It's a portal that many cannot see, but at the same time, it's a portal just as big as his body, so he'd immediately walk through it. That is still using this whole idea of channeling it through your entire body. So quickly he would catch wind of how to do this, especially after some late night training that he goes through personally. Izuku would just continue working, and over the next 3 days, he'd finally learn how to use One for All throughout his entire body. But it's not at 5%, it's actually only at 2%. Izuku, of course, has a good decent idea of how to use it, but he has no prior experience to using it like in canon. You could argue that maybe having a quirk initially would give him more insight, but there's no real proof of that actually being the case. He's had enough insight where he can probably get a grasp of it, but about 2% of One for All would make the most sense, at least in this situation. And Gran Torino would be pretty happy about this. 2% is better than no percent, and the fact that Izuku should be able to regulate that relatively quickly from just the experience that he has so far, and the upcoming training that he knows he will get in UA, Izuku could be at 20% in practically no time, at least theoretically. After some time just getting used to One for All and combining it eventually with his teleportation quirk, Gran Torino would eventually decide to take him to Hosu City, of course to do some simple patrolling, nothing too crazy and intense. But when they hop on a train and head over there, they begin to see crazy things going on. Explosions, fire, really anything you can think of, eventually leading to a Nomu smashing into the train. Izuku immediately helps out everybody to get to safety, at least to a cart that is away from the impact. Gran Torino jumps into action and immediately fights off the so-called Nomu and tells Izuku to stay put and basically help anybody else. Izuku, being Izuku, he doesn't listen, teleporting right next to Gran Torino as they head into Hosu City. Gran Torino remarks that he's not allowed to really use his quirk and basically to stay right beside him, or else it's gonna be really bad. He could get into some serious trouble. Izuku says that he'll make sure to stay on his hip and help out as much as possible. He begins to help out here and there, and just any escorting jobs he can do pretty easily. Just get people out of danger pretty easily. I mean, he has the perfect quirk for that. But just as he feels that, well, everything is going perfect, he begins to hear the voice of another hero by the name of Emmanuel. This hero is shouting for Tenya Ida, a classmate he knows. He immediately tells Gran Torino that may be an issue. Obviously, Izuku has heard about what happened to his brother, so he might be after somebody. Might be after somebody very, very specific. The hero killer, Stain. Izuku immediately tells this to Gran Torino being extremely concerned, obviously, but saying that he can't really do anything about it when they don't know where he is. Izuku doesn't know either, but says that he can teleport to every single alleyway, every single block, and he should be able to scour quick enough to find where he is exactly. Gran Torino is about to say that is not the best idea. It's going to drain him and make him tired, and on top of that, what is he going to do when he gets there? He's not going to have enough people with him to actually support him. Just as Gran Torino saying this, well, Izuku's already gone. He's teleporting to each alleyway, but luckily he comes across the one that the hero killer is in relatively quickly. Izuku grabs his own phone and clicks a location and sends it to a group chat, putting the phone on the ground as he walks forward. He's just hoping, and this is probably not the most heavy of hopes, that someone, at least in that group chat, would come to his aid and come and help out. Of course, he doesn't have the relationship he would have with Shoto Todoroki, but maybe, just maybe, Izuku's personality would allow him to get some trust with Todoroki and allow Todoroki to, well, come by to this alleyway. Izuku would see as Tenya Ida is on the ground, grabbing him and teleporting him out, at least out of the alleyway, but even himself, he knows that his power needs to be conserved as much as possible. There's a hurt person right there, and if he teleports in and Stain predicts that, well, it could get really bad. Luckily, Stain doesn't necessarily know Izuku's powers, but he stands right in front of the hero killer without any fear.
Now, who are you, kid? Seriously. Your power seems pretty interesting, but I'm gonna have to ask you to scram, because these two, they're not very good heroes, and they're gonna have to die here.
Izuku begins to tell him that unfortunately can't happen. Immediately, he's right in front of Stain and just punches him right in the stomach and kicks him toward a wall. Izuku is far faster than normal, even with only 2% of One For All, but with that stacked on with his teleportation quirk, Izuku realizes how fast he truly is and how fast he can really react. But the only problem is, he's combining two quirks, let's be honest, that don't really have the best stamina or requirements. Izuku, yes, of course, he has pretty good containment of his teleportation quirk, but he doesn't over One For All. One For All is already draining his stamina, so is his teleportation quirk, so now he has a massive drain on his stamina, tiring him out like crazy. Izuku decides that maybe he should try now to teleport them all away, grabbing Native, a hero that's currently on the ground, teleporting him away, and then teleporting him back to Tenya Ida. He goes to teleport Tenya Ida away, but he realizes that he's out of juice. He can't. He's exhausted, and frankly, he can only get the portal up, which is not the best thing, at least at this moment. He can't actually physically scan the portal over him, at least not in time. Izuku decides that he's going to stand his ground. Tired or not, he needs to do something. Izuku tries his best to fend off the hero killer as much as he possibly can, even pushing his body beyond what he can actually use in terms of One For All. But at the end of the day, he's slowing down, getting tired, and he realizes that he really only has one chance at this, one shot. And he realizes that he can't get Ida out of there because of his lack of stamina at this point, but he does have one idea up his sleeve. He begins to set up that said idea, and luckily, the perfect distraction would eventually come. A wave of fire and a redeemed Shoto Todoroki would show up, blasting through with his ice and flames. Luckily, this would give Izuku enough time to come up with exactly how he wants to do what he's going to do, and Todoroki remarks that if he has a plan, he might want to use it now. Just as Todoroki blasts his last bit of fire and ice toward Stain, Stain is right in front of Izuku with a sword penetrating his stomach. Todoroki is in complete shock at the fact that Izuku has a blade sticking out or sticking through his body. But then he realized the sword didn't go all the way through. Todoroki then looks towards Stain as another part of the blade is sticking out of the stomach of Stain as well. Izuku smirks and slightly coughs up some blood, and so does Stain. Stain pulls out his blade, and a portal on Izuku's stomach then disappears. But at the same time, there is a pretty nice gash of a wound going through Izuku's stomach. He wasn't able to get the portal open quick enough to avoid the blade entirely, so he had to take some of the attack. They both then collapse to the ground, and frankly, Stain is a little bit more worse for wear than Izuku at this point, but they both begin to slowly but surely bleed out. Luckily, other heroes then arrive and help both of them out, and arrest Stain and make sure Izuku is completely fine, and they bring him to a hospital as urgently as possible. When they wake up, everything else kind of goes the same way it would. The police captain would tell them that Endeavor and other heroes will be taking the credit for taking down Stain, and that would be basically a way for them to not get in trouble at all. And the whole wound with Izuku, luckily he didn't physically stab Stain on his own. Stain technically stabbed himself, so Izuku won't get in too much trouble for that. But they are told to never do something like this again, especially when they don't have any form of hero license. Izuku is happy that he's going to get off at least sort of scotch-free, and he apologizes to Gran Torino about what he did and the drastic measures he took. Gran Torino isn't too mad at Izuku. He does say that he needs to be a little bit more responsible with his choices, and he did put himself in the line of fire relatively quickly, but at the same time he's proud of Izuku. Taking that next step to hero, basically being a hero, is exactly what he did, sacrificing himself to make sure that these other people could survive, and he saved a decent amount of lives that day. Nonetheless, the recovery process would begin for Izuku, and they would head back to UA. Eventually, dorms would be implemented relatively quickly because of the entire incident with Hosu and everything else, and frankly, they decide that this would be for the best anyways because they could get training in a lot quicker in this regard. Izuku is actually fine with this. He doesn't really see this as too big of a deal, especially with the final exams coming up, and Aizawa explains that they will be doing a written and also a practical, but the practical is going to be a little bit different than what they would most likely expect. The practical or the written exam would blow over pretty easily. Izuku would finish that up, and frankly his studying wouldn't be too much different than canon, probably a little bit higher. Of course he would help Kirishima a good little bit, helping him out learn because, you know, Kirishima isn't the smartest person in the world. But nonetheless, they finish up that written exam, and luckily they're able to pass it with relative ease, or at least Izuku does. This then leads him to the practical exam. The practical exam is kind of where Izuku is definitely slightly worried. The practical exam will most likely be against heroes, or at least one of the teachers, and that would be extremely true. Izuku would see that all of the teachers are lined up. He begins to wait for everybody to get chosen and more or less who's going against who. And let's just say his matchup is definitely something a little bit different than what he was expecting. A matchup of All Might versus him and Katsuki Bakugou. Of course, they are not on good terms. Bakugou and him have never been on good terms, and they really can't stick together and make an actual plan. Izuku is pretty frustrated about this, but he hears the stipulations of basically how to pass, and he hates to admit it, but he's probably gonna get Bakugou pretty mad in this regard. Izuku stands there, and Bakugou says that he's going to take down All Might on his own, and he's gonna prove that he's going to be the #1 hero. Izuku says that how about they do a little challenge, that whoever beats All Might and the last one standing will basically be the one to raise their hand in victory. Bakugou immediately agrees to this, and when the gates swing open for their exam, Bakugou says that they're going to fight first and then they'll fight All Might. Izuku smiles at this and agrees. As Bakugou goes charging in, Aizawa is basically watching them, and everybody else is as well, in complete shock that they're really going to fight each other. But just as Bakugou charges at Izuku, a portal consumes Bakugou, teleporting him to the very end, and Izuku walks through that same portal and they pass through the gate, well, passing the exam. Immediately, Aizawa facepalms and realizes what Izuku was doing. He already knew what he wanted to do. He had no intention of fighting All Might, and he knew that escape would be the best. I mean, frankly, it was made pretty apparent that if there was a situation where you couldn't handle a villain foe, you would run away and look for help. All Might is the clear-cut version of this. Someone stronger than literally everybody in front of him. It would make the most sense just to leave. Izuku's not stupid. Of course he wants to test his strength, but he even knows with One For All, he hasn't had enough experience with it to go head-to-head with All Might. So why would he risk that? He baited Bakugou in because he knew Bakugou would not listen at all, and he would have to force him through a portal. So what would be the best way of going about it? Make a little portal and force Bakugou to, well, walk through it on accident. And that's exactly what Izuku did. Bakugou immediately charges at Izuku, but is right off the bat grabbed by Aizawa's scarf and dragged away. Aizawa looks at Izuku and gives him a thumbs up, basically telling him that they passed. Izuku's not so sure about Bakugou, but I mean, technically they're supposed to both pass, so he hopes for the best. But Izuku felt like this was the best course of action. All Might commends him as well, saying that, well, it's not the best idea to just fight head on, but a sparring session will be in his near future with All Might himself. Izuku says that he has no problem with that at all, and maybe they can do some training at the training camp. But eventually All Might would admit that he is not going, but Izuku would think that maybe there's some other people that he could spar with to get a hold on One for All a little bit more. Aizawa, after all of the training and all of the final exams are over, he would then explain that everybody is going to the forest training camp, but those who are deemed, well, that didn't pass, they will be actually taking extra classes. Izuku hears this and he's actually pretty relieved about this. He didn't really want to have anybody get left behind because frankly that would suck. But at the same time, this is a very Aizawa thing to do. A couple more days would pass and they would eventually head over to the forest training camp. Obviously, Class 1A would eventually arrive on a nice little overhang. And while standing on that overhang, they'd meet the Wild Pussycats. Izuku, still being kind of a nerdy hero lover, he would know exactly who they are and kind of fanboy over it, but then he would quickly realize what they're going to be doing. Izuku then watches as the ground crushes and sweeps all of his class off, and when he lands on the ground, he looks at everybody in kind of shock. Whoa, that was totally unexpected. Yeah, no, that's definitely something Aizawa would do, huh? They all look at him and ask if they could, teleport over. Izuku then scratches his head. Yeah, about that, guys. I'm really tired. Unfortunately, I overused my quirk in the practical exam. As he says this, though, a lot of them say that he barely used his quirk in the practical. Oh, yeah, you're right. I did barely. As he's making up some sort of excuse, he walks over to Kirishima and pats him on the shoulder and says that, see, his buddy here can explain, right? And as Kirishima is looking around in confusion, words are about to come out of his mouth, but they both just poof out of existence, or at least that's what it looked like. They both poof, and they're both at the training camp. His entire class is completely mad, but I mean, it's kind of expected. I mean, he obviously didn't want to teleport everybody, and he had a good feeling that Aizawa would be pretty mad at him if he did. And he would be correct, because when Aizawa arrives and only sees Izuku and Kirishima, he pats Izuku on the shoulder, saying that he's glad that he didn't allow his classmates to take the easy way out. Because, frankly, this is expected from Izuku. I mean, you might as well use your quirk to, well, get there pretty easily. But the other kiddos, they need training anyways. Izuku would slightly laugh at this, but when everyone would finally arrive, they'd be pretty mad at him. But Aizawa would make it clear that, frankly, Izuku helped them. It might sound weird, but he did help them. They would then go on to eat dinner, get cleaned up, and then go to bed. The next morning, they would all meet up once again to finally start their training. Izuku's portion of his training would be basically training with some of the Wild Pussycats, but more specifically Tiger. Tiger would allow him to expand his realm of hand-to-hand combat far beyond that of Gran Torino and just the basic things he knew at the moment. And his teleporting and being able to use One for All at the same time basically allows him to adapt to Tiger's fight style. More and more, Izuku is able to basically adapt and just learn just everything he possibly can. Izuku would continue this training, and the next day, an eerie feeling would definitely come across the camp. After they did a bunch of training and a bunch of things, Izuku would realize that some people were slowly but surely missing. He would get a weird feeling, and then as he thinks this, a giant explosion happens in the middle of the forest. he immediately thinks about the young boy by the name of Koda, teleporting to exactly where he saw him go. He immediately sees a giant man, this man by the name of Muscular. Izuku then grabs Koda, teleporting him away and getting him back to the camp, teleporting back toward this so-called monster of a being called Muscular, and he basically gets ready for a fight. But Muscular regards that there's no way he can physically match him. Izuku then smiles. Yeah, I understand that. I really do. Izuku appears right in front of him, teleporting him out of there and drops him in the middle of a giant lake. Izuku then teleports back and basically tells the police that there's a giant man in the middle of a lake nearby a certain area and nearby a certain police station, and they should send some pretty high-grade heroes over there. Izuku would then teleport back to his campgrounds and begins to just basically go around and help as many people as possible. Aizawa then tells him that he needs to get everybody he possibly can see and teleport them over here like now. Izuku says he got it, and he begins to teleport everybody to basically that area. Every single last student is now back at the camp, including Bakugou. This then forces the other villains to converge on the campsite. Everybody stands around Izuku, and Izuku begins to say that he's extremely tired, that he doesn't know if he can actually teleport everybody away. Just as the villains hear this though, they begin to get slightly relaxed. Izuku looks at them. There's no way you guys fell for that twice. Like, you realize I'm the same person, right? Just as he says this, he teleports them all away. They're all gone. Immediately back at UA, and every last person is sitting there, staring at Izuku. Okay, now I'm tired. Oh, I need a nap. Oh my god. Izuku just then passes out, and Kirishima slightly smiles and laughs, especially because, well, Izuku is showing a little bit more personality. He's not sure if it's cockiness or pride or basically him trying to be funny, but it's a good thing to see instead of the normal, serious Izuku. Everybody's confused. His best friend just basically passed out on the ground, and that's what he's thinking about. And Kirishima regards that he'll be just fine. He does this a lot. I mean, he passes out, wakes up in a couple days. He'll be okay. Kirishima is kind of in that same regard that he knows Izuku is strong. And he does push himself beyond his limits, probably a little too much. But luckily everybody is safe and sound. But just as they look around thinking everybody is, there's one person missing. Izuku thought he teleported Bakugou, but that's actually not the case. Someone else was actually there, and someone else is acting like Bakugou. Luckily, they're quickly spotted out, especially with how Bakugou acts. It's actually Toga. Toga is taken down and subdued relatively quickly, but that's not good. Bakugou currently missing and not with them, and well, the only person that can kind of teleport in and teleport out, immediately getting Bakugou out of there, is kind of out of commission. So, what will happen? Izuku's obviously out cold. The other heroes are going to need to start basically putting into action some sort of plan, and the final showdown with All for One seems to be right on the horizon, even though these heroes might not know it is. Toga has now been constrained, and frankly, they need to figure out where the heck Katsuki Bakugou currently is. But luckily, they get some information from somebody that was pretty injured when Deku actually swooped her up, and also another boy that was with her trying to help her out. Well, that is Momo Yaoyorozu. Momo Yaoyorozu actually put a tracker on a Nomu that may or may not lead them in the right direction. Izuku immediately says that he wants to see where this tracker leads, and he says that he can get Bakugou in and out immediately. But Aizawa reminds him that that is not a good idea. For one, he doesn't have an actual hero license, and for two, it could easily be a trap. Izuku is frustrated to hear this, but he understands their thought process. But Izuku is then told that, well, he could be in on some sort of a plan. He would then be brought to that so-called interview to speak with everybody about what occurred, and to even give the interviewers some 2 cents about what actually happened and how Bakugou got away, saying that it was really his fault, that it wasn't anybody else's fault but his own. He tried to save Bakugou, he tried to save everybody that was there using a quirk that was gifted to him by, well, obviously his mother and his father. But unfortunately it just didn't work out, and even though these are pro heroes that are teaching them, everybody needs to play a role. Yes, he may be a student, and that's what many of them are currently thinking, but just because they are students doesn't mean they cannot take on responsibility. Izuku makes all the interviewers nod, and basically they're all speaking over and over to them as Bakugou and the League of Villains are currently watching this broadcast. But what they don't know is that their location has already been revealed, and the siege on that building is about to begin. Immediately, All Might goes smashing through the wall, followed by Edgeshot and many others. This interview was actually not live. It was a pre-recording, and the villains have just fallen for it. Immediately, the villains are completely subdued and knocked out, and just to make sure everything goes perfectly, Izuku would teleport in immediately as the breach happened, grab Bakugou, and teleport right back to UA so that the villains have no leverage. But this would then lead to an all-for-one versus All Might battle. Of course, they would all be watching this battle as, well, the two titans would go blow for blow. Izuku would watch and wish that he could help, but just as he's seeing All Might being beat, that he's about to be taken out, about to be maybe even killed, he takes one step forward as if he's about to teleport, and Aizawa activates his quirk and shakes his head, telling him that this is out of their league. Even if Izuku is extremely powerful, this right here is something that even All Might wouldn't want him to get in front of. Aizawa nods toward him one last time and tells him to watch the screen and watch All Might truly show why he's the #1 hero. All Might, through sheer will and determination, would eventually win the fight, a fight that seemed like he was going to lose. The League of Villains may have gotten away, but All for One would be put in prison, and All Might would handle the fight with grace. But this would lead to the man's retirement, and to give everybody a thumbs up, telling them all that they are next. Izuku knows what he means by this, and even Bakugou at the same time does as well, having his suspicions about Izuku. But no one else really knows, being clueless and thinking that this was just a quirk evolution for Izuku, and him being stronger is just part of his quirk. Well, he's not going to basically dissuade them otherwise, especially against All Might's wishes. Eventually, school would start up once again, and they would begin learning new super moves, learning any techniques that would help them in the future. This is when the real training would currently begin. Of course, Izuku would push himself harder and harder, especially with his classmates, and eventually it would lead to something known as the Provisional Hero Licensing Exam. Izuku thinks this is great. I mean, getting his hero license as soon as possible is something he wants to do right now. So when they all head over about halfway through the week, Izuku would arrive and everybody would kind of fanboy over Class 1A. But of course, they don't actually know who Izuku is. Izuku was unfortunately unable to attend the UA Sports Festival, being that he was kind of out of commission. So they have no idea what his quirk is, and if for those who, well, don't understand where we're going with that, let's just say this is going to make things a lot easier for Class 1A. Because when the first event is revealed to be basically a ball event that would allow them to basically knock people out using these red balls, it would be pretty easy for his class because Izuku would be able to wrangle up a ton of people with relative ease, and nobody's gonna be even able to touch him. Izuku would get his place in the next event relatively easily, and so would the majority or most of Class 1A. Some of them who straggled off, of course, would have the same struggles that they originally had, but those around Izuku would basically be easily just handled like nothing. Izuku would then head out and wait for that next event, waiting with his entire class. As the next event would begin though, there would be a little bit more struggle than Izuku would believe. Of course, Izuku has a teleportation quirk, which makes rescuing extremely easy, and he just teleports the mass majority of people out of situations or just out of any trouble. But what he didn't realize is there's going to be more to this exam, so he shouldn't have exhausted himself as much as he currently did. But nonetheless, he's just going to have to lean on these other people to actually, well, fight. Izuku would watch as the sirens begin to blare, and these so-called villains and also Gang Orca would arrive, telling them all that it's, well, time for the heroes to be taken down. Of course, the most of the stronger people there would immediately take the forefront, but it would be shown that Gang Orca is stronger than what most everybody would think. Izuku would watch on as Shoto Todoroki and Inasa would hold the lines, but of course they would begin their bickering, their arguing, and Izuku would yell toward them, telling them to focus up and actually do their job. Izuku would continue saving as many people as possible, but in turn definitely making himself tired. Just as he realizes it though, or just out of nowhere, Shoto Todoroki and Inasa would seemingly, well, bite the bullet on themselves and begin to work in sync, making this flame vortex around Gang Orca. Just as he does this, it seems like they're about to take him down, but Gang Orca pulls something out. Is that a water jug? Izuku would immediately teleport within the vortex. Yes, this does make him extremely tired, but he slaps away the water jug away from Gang Orca, and just as Gang Orca tries to grab Izuku, Izuku teleports out without him even being able to touch him. This then drains Gang Orca entirely, eventually bringing him to his knees, making a Gang Orca completely just knock out. Of course, Inasa and Todoroki barely could tell what Izuku did, but everyone else could tell what occurred. Izuku knows how to use his strengths and his weaknesses against people. This teleportation aspect of his quirk allowed him to basically exploit a weakness that Gang Orca thought he had covered. But of course, to Izuku, he made sure that wasn't the case, that there was no weakness that wasn't going to be basically recovered from. After that, sirens would begin to blare again, and a voice on the intercom would tell them that the Provisional Hero License exam is over. After everybody heads out, they would all wait on their scores, and when their scores would eventually show up, Izuku would almost get a perfect score. Of course, Izuku's quirk made the rescue portion extremely easy, and just utilizing his quirk to his best of abilities just to support his classmates definitely helps his score go up like crazy. And there's really no complaining about someone just zipping in and out, saving every single person that's there with no real, well, you could say repercussions or no real, well, substantial injuries. Izuku would be happy about this and smile at the fact that he got his Provisional Hero licensing exam, or his license. But the only problem is Izuku knows in his head that there is more to all of this than he would possibly believe. This would then lead them to their work studies. The work studies is what really matters and the whole reason why they got this whole license. So Izuku begins to look through any work studies that he can possibly go to, but just as they're basically informed about this, Aizawa thinks it's a great idea to get the big three to actually explain to them what's going to happen. And of course, it goes about the same. They don't really know how to explain, leading to Mirio wanting to fight them, which is definitely interesting. Izuku would then wait for Mirio to give his go-ahead, and then tells them all that they're going to be fighting at the same time, which confuses Izuku, especially because he feels that this is extremely dangerous. Nonetheless, Mirio screams out power and begins to put the whooping on Class 1A. It was then Izuku's turn, and frankly, Mirio and Izuku just straight up can't hit each other. Izuku can't really time up his strikes onto Mirio because, well, Mirio is really good with his quirk, but at the same time, Mirio just whiffs on Izuku every time he even gets close, just teleporting out of the way of danger, and Izuku just keeps his distance relatively easily, even using some of One For All to basically send wind shockwaves toward Mirio, and especially that he's able to use about 10 to 15% of One For All after a ton of training. But even that, it kind of brings them to a stalemate. But his class is extremely impressed, so is Aizawa, and obviously the rest of the big three, because how is he able to keep up this well? Of course, he feels bad that like the rest of his classmates kind of got torn to shreds, and Kirishima wasn't really able to show off any training he's been doing, and the rest of his class really wasn't, because I mean Mirio just straight up countered them entirely. But this then leads to them having a quote-unquote draw, and Mirio is extremely impressed and says that that is definitely something he would expect from someone that Night Eye himself wanted to see. Of course, this would lead to them chatting a little bit more after class, and would eventually lead them to getting Izuku into a work study with Night Eye. Of course, they wouldn't have any little stamp test because Izuku can literally teleport. There is no stopping him from grabbing the stamp, in my opinion. On top of One For All, it would be too easy for him. Nonetheless, though, Izuku feels that this is a great experience for him, especially with someone like Night Eye. But Night Eye immediately gets straight to the chase, talking about why he's here. He's seen Izuku, and he thinks that his quirk is literally perfect for this scenario, perfect for scouting, and perfect for getting information as quick as possible. Izuku is completely down for this as he gets explained everything, learning about the Shie Hassaikai and who they're going after, Overhaul. And yes, Overhaul most likely will not be spotted on their first patrols, but at the same time they need to be ready to do what they need to do. With Izuku with Izuku there, they want a place on the slim chance that he shows up. They want Izuku to know exactly where to teleport him. They show him just an area, or Night Eye shows him an area of where the basically containment is, and it will completely cancel off both of their quirks. So of course, Izuku's going to have to get out of there without using his quirk, but no real reason to fear. There's going to be backup heroes there, and well, they both won't have their quirks, so it's not like they'll be defenseless, or it's not like he'll be completely defenseless against Overhaul's quirk. And this would actually, well, you could say, turn out to be the best, because these prearrangements would eventually mean that Overhaul would be caught. During a bit of a patrol with Mirio and Izuku, they would come across an alleyway with a little girl that would stumble into, well, himself and Mirio. When this occurred, Izuku would pat her on the head to see if she's okay. This girl's name is Eri, and the person that comes out of the alleyway next is Overhaul. Immediately, Izuku picks up Eri and basically keeps it as casual as possible, telling him that, oh, it's okay, that he gets it, that, you know, kids are gonna be kids. He walks up toward Overhaul to basically give Eri back to him, quote unquote, grabbing him on the shoulder and patting him there, saying that he's trying his best as a father. Just as he says this, though, all three of them are teleported somewhere entirely different, with guns loaded and a bunch of heroes immediately coming outside. Yes, they're not top tier heroes, but they're heroes at that. The Night Eye agency would eventually arrive on the scene, and Izuku would be commended heavily for what he did, the plan he executed, and frankly, it's for the best that nobody even really knew what Izuku's powers are. Because if he did, or if Overhaul did, Overhaul might have been able to figure it out or counter it as soon as possible. With that said, their job isn't quite done yet, because, well, they're gonna have to go and take out the rest of the Shie Hassaikai, but at the end of the day, everything will fall into place relatively quickly. Izuku and the Night Eye Agency and many others would team up and eventually lay siege on the Shie Hassaikai, well, secret hideout. And once they arrive, it ends quicker than you could possibly imagine. Of course, with Overhaul not there, the sequence of events would lay out pretty easily. On top of that, everybody would kind of fall to either Mirio, Izuku, or Night Eye Frankly, Izuku would be able to kind of subdue people relatively quickly with his teleportation quirk, so the Shie Hassaikai entirely would be shut down in a matter of days, and all because of, well, Izuku Midoriya. After some more time spending with the Night Eye work study, Izuku would finally be sent back to, well, UA. Of course, they've been going to classes and stuff, but they have a more of a major event coming up, and that event is the Class 1A versus Class 1B. Of course, over this time, Izuku has been training like crazy, and he basically begins to head over to, well, where they're going to be fighting. As he heads over there, though, he bumps into a boy by the name of Shinso, someone he actually has heard about but hasn't really spoken to at all because, well, he wasn't in the UA Sports Festival. He meets him for the first time and learns of Aizawa teaching him and also training him overall, and that he is going to be implemented in this Class 1A versus Class 1B. All of the fights would go relatively the same, and you could argue that Kirishima would probably do a lot better than he would in canon because of his connection with Izuku, previous training, and just how much further ahead he would have been compared to canon. On top of that, though, the fights with Izuku versus Class 1B would go, well, relatively similar. Izuku would power up One for All far past than what we would, or what he normally would, of course probably hovering around 20 to 25%, so closer to canon or maybe a little bit higher, and Izuku would utilize his teleportation with One for All, making his speed insanely fast to teleport people in and out, or basically to the cage or a prison that would allow them to win the match relatively easily. But of course, don't get this wrong, Class 1B did have a pretty good idea of what to do, and of course Monoma would steal the quirk from Izuku. But the only problem is, Izuku has two quirks, meaning that this would be recognized by Monoma, but at the same time would drastically confuse him. But you have to remember, Izuku's teleportation quirk isn't that simple. It's not something that he would be able to pick up, especially off a whim, and there's a good chance he could definitely hurt himself if he's not careful, because, like I've said in the past, it's miniature portals that Izuku uses that most people can't see with the bare eye, and it happens so quickly that Monoma might actually fail to actually utilize it properly. Nonetheless, though, they continue with their fights, and Izuku, utilizing his quirks and the strengths of his teammates, ranging from Ochaku Uraka and various others, would win in a pretty much of a landslide. But during this battle, during the very, very last bit of it, when there's practically only 1 to 2 people left on the 1B side, Izuku would unleash a power that he would have no idea how to control, and no idea that was within him. That would be Black Whip. Black Whip would begin to run haywire around like crazy, but luckily he's able to get it tamed and done over with, and since there wasn't many Class 1B students left, it didn't necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things. But Izuku would realize that there is more to the quirk of One for All than he possibly could imagine. Izuku, after this entire incident, would begin to take training even more serious and begin his training with the Big Three and even the Sir Night Eye's agency more and more, especially because he, well, is doing a work study with him. And since Sir Night Eye is not, well, deceased, that work study would 100% continue. Especially with the training with Mirio, maybe even some of the Big Three, and Night Eye himself, Izuku would begin to get a bigger grasp on everything he begins to learn. From One for All, to Black Whip, to anything you can really think of, and even more, his teleportation quirk would continue to evolve. But what he doesn't know, and what he doesn't realize, is that there's something that is just over the horizon. There is something that is terrifying, something that is Well, bone chilling. A war is coming, and a war is being spotted out by the one and only Hawks. Hawks is currently giving information to Endeavor and various other heroes that he can trust, and that includes Sir Night-Eye. And when the code is cracked, and it's realized that a war is upon them, how will Class 1A, Class 1B, and various other heroes and heroes in training react to the news? Well, how well will Izuku fight in this war that is only months away? Well, that's a story for another day